my name is Ellie Barnes. I'm a writer and a librarian, and today I'm going to read two books written by Stephen King. We're going to talk about two books in the Bill Hodges series. Apparently the Bill Hodges series is going to be a trilogy. The first two are out, the third will come out in 2016. The first book is Mr. Mercedes. The second book is Finders Keepers. There we go. Both books, the theoretical main character is a retired detective named Bill Hodges. In Mr. Mercedes, King goes back and forth between his protagonist, which is Bill Hodges, and his antagonist, whose name is Bradley Hartfield. It begins with Bradley Hartfield stealing a Mercedes and driving it through a line of people waiting outside a job fair. Bill Hodges was assigned to the case. Now, we don't go through that original investigation. We catch up with him years later when Hartfield starts sending him anonymous letters to taunt him for the fact that he didn't catch him. The thing that works in Mr. Mercedes is that the antagonist is really interesting to read. He's doing and thinking terrible things, but he's very active, and there's such a glee to his violence and to his craziness. The other thing that works really well is the characters, who are so much fun to hang out with, that when King starts laboring over his plot points, which he always does, he drags them out like you wouldn't believe, then I didn't even notice. At one point, Stephen King spends dozens of pages with Hodges figuring out how Bradley Hartfield got the key to the Mercedes in order to steal it, because he knows it wasn't broken into and he knows it wasn't hotwired. During that period of time, as I was reading it, I was just enjoying the characters. I didn't realize we were still trying to figure out how he got the key, and I kind of didn't care. In the end, I just wanted to hang out with these people. Finders Keepers came out a couple months ago. I read it as soon as it came out. I will say, where Finders Keepers fails is exactly where Mr. Mercedes succeeded, in the antagonist and the characters. The antagonist in Finders Keepers is a man named Morris Bellamy. And again, we're going to go back and forth between him and a protagonist, and actually Bill Hodges, who's sort of a secondary protagonist in this one. The thing with Morris Bellamy is that he's very active at the beginning of the story. He breaks into the home of his favorite author, kills him, and removes all of his notebooks and all of his money. During that period of time, when he's doing these things, he's interesting to read. Then, through circumstances I'm not going to explain because you have to find out if you want to read the book, he ends up going to prison. And he's there for 20 years. And he starts blaming everything on everyone else. And he starts whining. And at that point, he's not doing anything, he's not saying anything interesting, but we're stuck with him. So there's a whole middle section of the book where, honestly, I just did not want to hang out with that character anymore. Now there's a new protagonist in Finders Keepers. It's a boy who's in, I think, elementary school age when the book begins, because he's a teenager by the time we get into the real action of the book. His name is Pete. And he's engaging, and he's interesting, and he's trying to solve problems, and he's feeling guilty about this, that, and the other, and engaging with literature. So he's interesting to read. But we don't get to Bill Hodges and the cast of characters for Mr. Mercedes until the second part. And then they just kind of show up. They have no deep relationship with what's going on between Pete and Morris. They're there to help, which is nice, but they're kind of chewing scenery. I have good reason to believe that the third book will be really interesting. I can't explain to you why without spoiling the end of Mr. Mercedes in the middle of Finders Keepers. So just trust me. I think the third one is going to be good, and I'm excited about it coming out. Therefore, if you want to read these two books, I don't think you'll have any trouble with Mr. Mercedes, but I'm going to have to explain to you how you need to read Finders Keepers. It's split into three parts. The first part is mostly Morris Bellamy and Pete Saunders. So it's interesting and engaging, and worth reading. Plus there's a whole lot of plot there you can't live without. Then we're split into this small, again this is a large print so the scale is a little off, but this second section, this is part 2, it's called Old Pals. There's a whole lot of unnecessary stuff in here. You can read closely the parts that are about Pete Sauvers because each section will focus on a different character. And sometimes they cross over each other, but you usually know who you're reading about from the first few sentences. So if it's Pete Sauvers, you need to read it. If it's Bill Hodges, you might want to skim it just for fun because again, you get to hang out with him and the characters from Mr. Mercedes. But if it's Morris Bellamy, you can almost completely skip it because he doesn't do anything in part 2. At one point, seriously, he drives around waiting for the sun to go down. And we get to see every stop he makes and every little thing he does. He doesn't talk to anyone who's part of the main plot. He doesn't accomplish anything. And he discovers something that at some point he needed to discover, but the audience already knew. This is what I mean when I say Stephen King labors over certain plot points. There is a thing Morris Bellamy had to discover. It would be interesting when he discovers it, but you remove all the tension if you talk about every last little part of his drive on the way there. At one point King, I'm not kidding, spends 2 sentences explaining how Morris Bellamy could get a screwdriver if he wanted one. Spoiler alert, they sell them at Home Depot. Which wouldn't be such a horrible thing to add if that character hadn't been in Home Depot 2 pages earlier. He starts to become active and worth reading in the 3rd part. But that 2nd part, you've just got to get through it. Having said all that, I do recommend these books. I think the 3rd one will be good when it comes out in 2016 because of the characters that'll be in it. Again, I can't explain. But you need to read Mr. Mercedes and you'll need to read Finders Keepers because of the people who are involved. And because the beginning and the end are worth reading. So once again, I am recommending Mr. Mercedes and the beginning and the ending of Finders Keepers. If you've read these books, please let me know in the comments down below. If you're excited about reading them, you can also tell me about that. By all means, subscribe and like if you enjoyed this, and I will see you next week.